I was challenged recently by my good friend the Academic Agent through a segment that he recorded on a cigar live stream with two guests discussing the woke fervour of the left as to why the left subverts institutions, and then why, when it has taken these institutions for itself, does it continue to crush or invade, name and shame, and otherwise destroy new institutions and spaces set up expressly as bastions of anti-left or even simply non-political arenas. In truth, as a former socialist leftist myself, the answer is, on the face of it, rather simple, but it does provide some additional insights that can be derived from the tactics involved. The short answer is that the left will continue to do what the left is already doing. Despite having taken the educational system, from primaries to universities, and despite having corrupted the political landscape in just such a way that they have managed to instantiate thought crime laws into the modern judicial system, despite initiatives that have formed the backbone of political debate, discussion and policy on rehabilitative prison reform, policing reform, green energy, drug use, sexual conduct, minority privileges, sex education, social education, historical education, and no doubt others that I have neglected to list, the left sees itself as at war with these institutions. The a priori assumption of the left, that is, the deduced knowledge, as opposed to the observed or empirically derived knowledge, is that the world is immeasurably corrupted by racism, sexism, class divides, biological differences, and by the many inequalities between human beings. This statement by itself does not appear to be that untrue, if not for the two phrases, immeasurably corrupted, and by the many inequalities. Human beings are, of course, flawed creatures, and one of the signs that one has matured in the world is to recognise this reality and then adapt to it, recognising it as human nature. This is something religion, embrace it or reject it as you will, recognises. The leftist dogma might be seen as a parody of the fallen world tradition of the Christian Church. I promise I won't dwell too long on this, but the Christians believe that through the individual emulation of Christ, we can transcend the fallen nature of human existence. This is not perfect, we all make mistakes, but is the unique nature of Christianity as a saved by faith doctrine rather than through acts alone that makes it special, recognizing the reality that we will never become perfect beings here. The left, on the other hand, believes only in acts, that humans are perfect first, see Rousseau's The Noble Savage, and then corrupted by society, or the world as the Christians put it. Biological reality does not matter to the left. Any such differences, if they do exist, are merely an extension of your perfect being before the rot of reality sets in. You have the conscious power to resist this rot, if given the tools, if given the education, if made aware of the dangers of the reality into which the left wishes to indoctrinate you into. Of course, in the real world, this is not the case, which is why the phrase, "the left eats itself," is so pertinent. Because of the reality of actuality, human flaws can never be truly stamped out, even with a lifetime of personal reflection and rumination. A human truly without flaw would be one who never moved, never tried, never experimented, never lived. Even then, the indecision, inability, lack of independence, well, many would consider that a flaw in equal measure. Because of the universality of the left's thinking, they do not consider themselves to have captured any institutions. These are merely battles in the ongoing war to stamp out whichever ism of the weak has taken their fancy. And so, we come back to the original question: what is the left's justification for invading unwoke spaces? It is because they are at war, and because of this thinking, they cannot abide the existence of something that isn't them. They see themselves as subversive. Although the academic agent is fond of saying, if you're pushing on an open door, you are not a radical, the left sees itself as radical because even if they become the majority within an institution, it is their job to stamp out the minority of opinion. This is why we hear so much about the racial attainment gap, about sexism and rape culture on campus, even though the left has, broadly speaking, completely captured the universities, and you would think that, given their beneficent and moral worldview, they would have been able to stamp out these things. This is why they cannot face the reality that conservatives and right-identifying people make up less than 1% of the universities, and yet their regime is no more benevolent than what came before, and in fact in many ways is more oppressive and dangerous than those they captured the institutions from. The left practices a kind of dualistic thinking as opposed to purely pluralistic, although the intersectional types will claim that they have pluralistic thinking because they are considering the perspective of X category of person. But this too is pluralism in its simplest form. They have defined all of the categories themselves rather than through observation, and then through relentless social pressuring via mainstream and social media and through political programs, they have emphasised the categories that they have defined. Relatively few people in the UK would have identified themselves, say 20 years ago, as a product of their race and their sex. Here it is often class, a middle class upbringing, and heritage, a Northumbrian Brit, or a Cornishman, or indeed something to do with football teams. But both of these categories are based on a rich history of tangibly linked factors. Class denoting a type of education, a manner of speaking, a certain kind of income. Heritage, county or nationally based, is the personal ancestry, or ancestors adjacent, that we are linked to. The modern leftist rejects these notions as inflammatory tactics that reinforce harmful stereotypes. After all, a history is a racist, sexist history. Even if it is interesting to read, it was written, collated and distributed by problematic peoples. All class distinction is the demarcation of privilege and oppression. None of these has worth to the leftist, except for the history of resistance against the instantiated structures of today. If you aren't on side, you either need to be brought on side through coercion or infiltration, or destroyed. There is no room in the ardent leftist worldview for any space in public or private life that can be considered to have an iota of oppression within it, or indeed any natural hierarchy, as these things do not exist in the Foucauldian and Marxian worldview. Outside of practical matters, this extends to leisure as well, of course. Comedy is the first source of problematic material. Anything which mocks or satirises reinforces, intentionally or unintentionally, the divisions that we face today. Then comes fiction, through which one may envisage another world, and therefore, if they do that, they must envisage the correct world. Comedy and fiction are the easiest to assail, as they are the products of human creative endeavour. Non-fiction is harder to destroy, but nonetheless it can be done through the infiltration of publishing houses and academic journals to control the flow of what can and cannot be seen by the public. This is just one example of an industry. Sports may also come to mind. Historical enterprise are corrupted, in the left's mind, by the annals of history and the bigoted perceptions, the invariably bigoted perceptions, of their founders. It doesn't matter what the enterprise produces or has produced, or what reputation it has acquired or is yet to acquire. In fact, institutions with reputation are the first to be targeted, because surely their reputation would only increase with interventions that allowed everyone to take advantage of that reputation. So we come to today, where every international student I have spoken to recognises that the universities of the UK are not the world leaders in free thought, hard work, and education. Instead, they are lingering relics trading on a reputation that they fail to uphold consistently, if at all. Certainly, the universities have turned their focus from what you can achieve in the world to what you can socially achieve in the world. Naturally, with this homogenization of the institutions, the public becomes bored, disinterested or frustrated, and the institutions begin to fail. The lack of social innovation and tolerance of critical thought in any manner but the prescribed one leads to stagnation. Most people aren't stupid, and they will turn away from these things. The left will blame the failure of these institutions on the bigoted clientele that the institution serves. And once they begin to truly fail, financially as well as morally and competitively, then they will turn on each other, becoming the clawing factions fighting to claim that the others are, and were, the moral failures that have allowed this institution to fall. So how does the left sustain itself? By co-opting the majority of education, and indeed government programs, through the long march through the institutions, the waves of failed leftists, miserable, single, convinced that they could have saved the world if only they were not held down, if they had only been born later, can be replaced with freshly indoctrinated recruits born of the bosom of state-sponsored subterfuge, much like the totalitarian states of communism and Nazism. The left is similarly totalitarian. Instead, it controls via social methods and moral shaming. It's as insidious as the Nazis, as ruthless as the Soviet Union, as practically inept as it is socially viperous. Eventually, if the leftist does not mature, they become murderous themselves, or suicidal, sometimes both. I do not claim to know the outcome of this great social conflict of our era, but I hope this short video has provided some food for thought. I look forward to your commentary in the comments section below, and thank you for watching.